Okay, learner, are you ready to level up your communication skills?
I think we all could use a little help in that department.
Exactly. And that's why today we're going deep on two books that just might change how you approach pretty much any interaction.
Oh, and these aren't just for like personal conversations either.
No way. We're
Okay.
talking boardrooms, international diplomacy, even like family arguments.
Those can be the toughest.
Tell me about it. But hey, that's why we're here. So first up, Getting to Yes by Fisher, Urey, and Patton.
Published back in 1981, but still just so relevant.
Right, like Elliot Richardson called it possibly the most useful book you'll ever read.
And Cyrus Vance praised its simple but powerful ideas.
Exactly. It's not about tricks or manipulation. It's a whole framework, a strategy for getting to agreements that work.
And what's really interesting is the author's backgrounds. Roger Fisher was a Harvard Law professor emeritus and director of the Harvard Negotiation Project. Yeah, and along with William Murray and editor Bruce Patton, they weren't just writing about negotiation, they were living it trying to resolve real-world conflicts.
So they brought a ton of practical experience to the table.
Absolutely.
Okay, so fast forward to the later editions of the book, and they made a really interesting choice. They kept the core text largely unchanged.
Oh, why is that?
Well, they didn't want to mess with the foundational principles, but they did add new material addressing common questions and updating
So
examples.
it stays fresh and relevant.
Exactly. They dive into stuff like how to move from brainstorming ideas to actually making commitments. And something a lot of people struggle with, how to negotiate when you feel like the other side has all the power,
Yeah, that's a tough one.
for sure. But those are exactly the kinds of situations Getting to Yes tackles head on,
Okay, so alongside Getting to Yes, we've got Marshall Rosenberg's Nonviolent Communication.
also known as NVC.
Right, and this one takes a slightly different but equally powerful approach. It's all about understanding the needs driving our own communication and those of the people we're interacting with.
And the forward by Arun Gandhi is incredible.
Yeah, he talks about learning from his grandfather about dealing with anger and injustice and how Rosenberg's work offers a path toward real transformation in our relationships.
Moving away from defensiveness and blame towards empathy.
Exactly. And understanding Rosenberg's own background is key to appreciating NVC. He studied with Carl Rogers, a pioneer in humanistic psychology.
Interesting.
Yeah, and this really shaped his thinking, moving beyond this idea of what's wrong with people to exploring how we can connect in ways that support everyone's well-being.
And in 1984, he founded the Center for Nonviolent Communication.
Really putting these principles into action globally, the whole idea is to become more conscious of the needs driving our communication and to learn how to connect in ways that make it more likely those needs will be met.
So, learner, ready for your deep dive mission.
What are we looking for here?
We're going to extract the core wisdom from both Getting to Yes and NDC and see how you can use them in your everyday life.
Sounds good to me.
We'll be highlighting the overlaps between the two approaches and the unique perspectives they each offer.
All right, let's do this.
Okay, so let's start with Getting to Yes and one of the biggest pitfalls they identify in negotiation:
Hit me with it.
positional bargaining.
Okay, I've definitely been there.
Think about it like haggling over a price. The book uses the example of an antique shop. The seller asks for $75, you counter with $15, and then you're both locked into your positions, each trying to wear the other down.
Oh yeah, I've been in that exact scenario. It can get pretty tense.
Right. And the thing is, even if you reach a compromise, like splitting the difference at $45, neither of you might feel totally happy with it.
And the whole back and forth can take so much time and energy. You might even walk away feeling like you lost or like the other person took advantage of you.
Not a great feeling.
Mhm.
And Getting to Yes points out that this kind of haggling often obscures the real reasons behind people's demands. They call them interests.
Interests. So like what's driving their position?
Exactly. What's the why behind the what? And they argue that understanding these underlying interests is key to getting to agreements that actually work for everyone.
Okay, so they're not just focused on the positions people take, but the motivations behind them.
Right. And they even distinguish between two types of positional bargaining: soft and hard.
What's the difference?
Well, soft bargainers are more focused on reaching an agreement, even if it means making concessions. They want to avoid conflict.
So kind of like prioritizing harmony over getting their needs fully met.
Yeah. And on the flip side, hard bargainers see negotiation as a battle to be won. They use aggressive tactics to try to force the other side to give in.
So it's all about winning at all costs.
Pretty much. And the authors argue that neither of these approaches consistently leads to what they call a wise agreement.
Wise agreement.
Yeah, one that meets the legitimate interests of all sides, is efficient, and doesn't damage the relationship.
Okay, so it's not just about the outcome, it's about the process and how you get there.
Exactly.
So what's their alternative? How do we avoid this positional bargaining trap?
They propose something they call principled negotiation.
Okay, so it's not about being soft or hard, it's about being principled.
Right. And it rests on 4 key principles. The first one is to separate the people from the problem.
So, like, don't take things personally.
It's more than that. They remind us that we're all human beings with emotions, perceptions, and communication challenges.
We all have our baggage.
Totally.
Yeah.
And when we get locked into positions, our egos can get involved, making it way harder to find common ground.
It's like we stop seeing each other as people and just become these opposing forces.
Exactly. And so the idea is to disentangle those emotions from the issues themselves, to address those people problems separately and directly.
So, like, acknowledging hurt feelings or misunderstandings.
Right. And the goal is to shift from an adversarial mindset, us versus them, to a collaborative one, us together against the problem.
That's a powerful shift.
Totally.
Okay, so principle 1, separate the people from the problem. What's principle number 2?
Principle number 2 is to focus on interests, not positions.
Okay, back to those interests. So reminding ourselves of the why behind the what.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Remember, your position is just what you've decided you want. Your interests are the deeper reasons why you want it. Your needs, your desires, your concerns, even your fears.
Makes sense.
And by understanding those underlying motivations, both your own and the other person's as more, you open up a world of possibilities for creative solutions.
Okay, so can you give me an example of that?
Sure. The book talks about the negotiations between Israel and Egypt over the Sinai Peninsula.
Oh, wow, that's a big one.
Right. So on the surface, Israel's position might have been that they wanted to keep the land for security reasons. Egypt's position was that they wanted to regain full sovereignty over the area.
Okay, so it sounds like a pretty direct conflict.
It does, right. But when you look at the underlying interests, Israel's core need was security. Egypt's was about national pride and sovereignty.
I see.
And in the end, the solution, they reached the demilitarization of the Sinai, combined with the display of the Egyptian flag, addressed both of those fundamental interests.
Without either side having to completely abandon their initial position.
Exactly. It wasn't about who owned the land in the traditional sense anymore. It was about finding a solution that met those deeper needs.
Okay, so that's a pretty high-stakes example.
True, but this principle applies just as well to everyday situations. The book is another example, a tenant who doesn't want fresh paint in their apartment because of allergies.
Oh, yeah, I can see where that would be a problem.
Right, and the landlord wants to paint to avoid having to repaint all the units later.
So their positions are at odds.
Yeah, but their underlying interests, the tenant's health, and the landlord's desire to minimize costs and hassle, can be addressed by finding a solution that meets both.
Right.
Like using a specific type of hypoallergenic paint or maybe only painting certain areas of the apartment.
Exactly.
So the key is to ask why. Why do they hold that position? What are they really hoping to achieve?
Right. And remember, each side in a negotiation usually has multiple interests, some shared and some in conflict.
So it's about uncovering those and seeing where they might align.
Okay, ready for principle number 3.
Weigh it on it.
Invent options for mutual gain.
So this is where the creativity comes in.
Exactly. Before getting fixated on one specific solution, the authors encourage brainstorming a whole range of possibilities that could potentially work for everyone involved.
So thinking outside the box.
Totally. And a key part of this stage is separating the act of generating ideas from the act of evaluating them.
So no shutting down ideas prematurely?
Right. You need to create a safe space where people feel comfortable throwing out even wild or unconventional options without being judged.
Sounds fun.
It can be. And they suggest different techniques like brainstorming within your own team first to come up with a bunch of ideas. Okay.
And you can even consider brainstorming with the other side, although they caution about being careful not to give away sensitive information too early or having a brainstormed idea mistaken for a firm offer.
Yeah, you don't want to accidentally commit to something before you're ready.
Right. And another powerful concept here is to look for shared interests, things that both sides value, and to explore what they call dovetailing solutions, where you find things that are low cost for you, but high value for the other side and vice versa.
So like finding those win-win scenarios that maybe aren't obvious at first glance?
Exactly. They give the example of Townsend Oil and the town of Pageville, where the town wanted to raise taxes on the refinery.
Okay.
So instead of just arguing about the tax rate, they could explore shared interest in the refinery's long-term success and the town's economic well-being.
So maybe coming up with options like phased tax increases tied to specific community investments or job creation programs.
You got it.
Okay, principle number 3, invent options for mutual gain. What's the fourth principle of principled negotiation?
This one's important. It's insist on using objective criteria.
Objective criteria.
Yeah, so this becomes essential when your interests still clash, even after you've brainstormed and explored various options.
So when you're kind of at an impasse.
Right. And the idea is instead of just trying to force the other side to accept your preferred outcome, you base the agreement on fair, impartial standards that are independent of either party's will.
So not just what you want or what they want, but what's fair based on some external standard.
Exactly. This could be things like market value, expert opinions, industry standards, legal precedents, even historical data.
Interesting. So how does that work in practice?
Well, the book uses the example of the Law of the Sea Conference, where there was a huge dispute over fees for seabed mining.
Okay.
They were totally stuck. But they eventually resolved it by using an economic model developed by MIT, which both sides accepted as a legitimate objective standard.
So it took the emotion out of it and grounded the decision in something neutral.
Exactly. The key here is to have a reasoned discussion about what constitutes a fair standard and to be open to persuasion.
So not just digging your heels in and saying, my way or the highway.
Right. It's about engaging in a dialogue about what makes sense based on these agreed upon criteria.
So ultimately, you're yielding to principle, not pressure.
Exactly. Okay, ready to shift gears and explore how NVC connects with all of this.
Absolutely. I'm curious to see how they overlap.
It's pretty amazing how much common ground there is, even though the language and the step-by-step process of NVC feel distinct from getting to yes.
So they come at it from different angles, but with similar goals.
Exactly. Like NVC's emphasis on understanding these totally echoes the focus on interests in getting to yes.
Right. And they both really advocate for separating the person from the problem, although NVC approaches this through a very specific lens.
For sure. So NVC provides this really practical 4-part framework for both expressing ourselves authentically and understanding others empathically.
Okay, so it's like a communication toolkit.
Absolutely. And the first component is observations.
So like what we're actually seeing and hearing.
Right. But the key is to state those observations clearly and factually without adding any evaluation or judgment.
So like just the facts, ma'am.
Exactly. Because NVC points out that when we mix our observations with our opinions or interpretations, the other person is likely to hear criticism.
Which immediately puts them on the defensive.
Right. They're less likely to listen to what you have to say if they feel like you're attacking them.
Makes sense.
So there's this great illustration in the book from a song by Ruth Babermeyer.
Oh, I love her work.
Right. So she contrasts saying, "I've never seen you run," with the judgment, "You are lazy."
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a big difference.
Right. Or "You did things I did not understand," versus the label, "You are stupid." It's about sticking to the concrete observable facts without adding our story about them.
Okay, so another example, the principal who always tells long personal anecdotes during faculty meetings.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic.
Instead of saying you dominate the meetings or you talk too much, which are evaluations, you could focus on the observation.
Something like, during faculty meetings, you often share personal stories, and the meetings frequently run over the scheduled time.
Right, sticking to what's actually happening without the judgment.
Exactly.
Okay, so component 1, observations. What's the second part of the NVC framework?
Feelings. This is where you identify and articulate the specific emotions you're experiencing that are connected to your observation.
So not just what's happening, but how you're feeling about it.
Exactly. And a key distinction in NVC is between expressing genuine feelings and expressing thoughts or interpretations that include blame.
Okay, so like instead of saying, I feel like you don't respect me, which is more of a judgment about the other person's intentions.
You'd express the actual feeling like, "I feel frustrated," or "I feel unheard."
Right. Owning your own emotional experience.
Exactly. And NVC emphasizes taking responsibility for our feelings, recognizing that they come from our own needs and how we interpret situations, not solely from the actions of others.
It's so easy to blame others for how we're feeling.
For sure. But this is about recognizing that our feelings are ultimately our own.
The book gives that great example of Speaker B, who felt irritated because the other party canceled their contract.
Right.
But then she realized her irritation actually stemmed from her own blaming thoughts. They should have known better. It was about shifting from blaming them to understanding her own reaction.
That's a powerful realization.
Okay, component 2, feelings. What's the third piece of the NVC puzzle?
Needs. This is where you connect your feelings to the universal human needs that are either being met or unmet in a given situation.
Universal human needs.
Yeah. Rosenberg provides this whole list of fundamental needs, things like autonomy, connection, honesty, play, physical well-being, and many others.
So these are needs that we all share as human beings.
Exactly. And by recognizing and expressing our needs, it helps others understand us on a deeper level.
And hopefully respond with more compassion.
Right. It's hard to dismiss someone's needs when they're articulated clearly and authentically.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all fits together.
The book gives some really powerful examples of conflicts between farm workers and landowners or Israelis and Palestinians where communication breaks down because it's all about blame and accusations.
Instead of focusing on those deeper needs for security, respect, or fairness.
Exactly.
All right, so we've got observations, feelings, needs. What's the fourth component of NVC?
Requests. This is where you make clear, specific, and actionable requests of others.
So not just complaining about what's wrong, but asking for what you need.
Exactly. And it's important to phrase your request in terms of what you do want, not what you don't want.
Okay, so instead of saying, don't leave your clothes on the floor, you might say, would you be willing to put your clothes in the hamper?
You got it. And you want to be as specific as possible about the action you're requesting.
So it's clear what you're asking for.
Right. A really helpful tool within the request component is asking for a reflection.
A reflection.
Yeah, just asking the other person to tell you back what they heard you say.
So you can make sure you're on the same page.
Exactly. It minimizes misunderstandings and helps ensure that your message was received as intended.
That's such a simple but powerful technique.
It really is. The book gives the example of a mother who's feeling overwhelmed and wants help with household chores.
Okay.
But she's having trouble articulating a clear request.
So it's like, just help me, but that's not very specific.
Right. And then there's the example of a client who wants to feel loved, but struggles to express what that actually looks like in concrete terms.
Yeah, it can be tricky to translate those abstract needs into specific requests.
Totally. And it's something we often need to practice.
Okay, so woven throughout all of this in NVC is the concept of empathy.
Yes. It's about truly understanding and sharing the feelings and needs of another person.
So not just thinking about what you want, but trying to see things from their perspective.
Right. And in NVC, empathy involves active listening, really focusing your attention on what's alive in the other person, their current feelings and unmet needs.
And resisting the urge to judge them or offer unsolicited advice or solutions.
Totally. It's
Okay.
about being present with them and their experience without trying to fix it or explain it away.
There's this incredible anecdote in the book about a woman who encountered a man holding a knife.
Oh, wow.
Right. And instead of panicking or reacting defensively, she focused on listening for his fear and desperation. And by doing that, she was able to de-escalate a potentially violent encounter.
That's so powerful.
Yeah, and the book points out that empathy can also revitalize conversations that have gone stale.
By tuning into those unspoken emotions and needs.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground with NVC. Let's swing back to getting to yes for a minute. They talk about this concept called negotiation jujitsu.
I love that term. What's it all about?
It's about dealing with situations where the other party might be stuck in that positional bargaining mode and not engaging in a principled way.
So when they're not playing fair.
In a sense, yeah. And the idea with negotiation jujitsu is to not directly attack their position, but to try to understand their interests.
So instead of fighting fire with fire, you're kind of using their own momentum against them.
Exactly. Instead of defending your own proposals, you invite their criticism and suggestions.
Okay. Interesting approach.
Yeah, and you reframe their attacks on your ideas as opportunities to clarify the problem you're both trying to solve.
So like turning it into a shared challenge rather than a battle of wills.
Right. Asking open-ended questions and intentionally pausing during the conversation can be really helpful here.
Creating that space for reflection.
Exactly. It allows you to better understand their perspective without becoming immediately reactive or defensive.
Okay. And they also talk about something called the one text procedure.
What's that?
It's where a neutral third party helps to guide the process by drafting a single negotiating text.
So like a mediator.
Yeah, kind of. It's presented as a way to break through those positional deadlocks when both sides are entrenched.
That makes sense.
There's a great case study in the book about Jones Realty and a tenant named Frank Turnbull who's facing eviction.
Okay.
And instead of getting angry or defensive, Turnbull focuses on the principle of fairness and invites Mrs. Jones to point out any inaccuracies in his understanding of the situation.
So he's staying calm and focused on the facts.
Right. He's not getting caught up in the emotional drama.
Okay, so what about when the other side resorts to straight up manipulation? Getting to yes calls these dirty tricks.
Yeah, and they don't mince words about it.
So what's the advice there?
They say first, recognize the tactic for what it is, then explicitly name it and negotiate the rules of the game itself.
So don't just let it slide, call them out on it.
Exactly. They outline all these different categories of manipulative tactics, from outright deception to psychological warfare.
Psychological warfare, like what?
Like the good guy, bad guy routine, where one person acts tough and the other one seems more reasonable, but they're both working together to pressure you.
Oh, wow, that's sneaky.
Totally. Or using personal insults to undermine your confidence.
Yikes.
Then there are the positional pressure tactics, like making extreme demands right off the bat, or refusing to negotiate at all.
So just trying to bully you into submission.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The crucial message here is to stay principled. Don't let them drag you into their games.
Right, hold your ground.
Exactly. And remember, building a reputation for honest and fair dealing will serve you well in the long run.
Okay, so as we wrap up here, it's clear that while getting to yes and NVC take different approaches, they share a lot of common ground.
Yeah, they both emphasize looking beyond stated positions to those underlying interests and needs.
And they both advocate for separating the person from the problem, focusing on collaboration rather than conflict.
Absolutely. And that emphasis on objective criteria in getting to yes aligns really well with NVC's call for clear, specific requests based on those identified needs.
Right. And the emotional intelligence that you cultivate through MVC can be a huge asset in any negotiation.
It makes it more likely to reach outcomes that are not just mutually beneficial, but also built on respect and understanding.
Okay, so learner, as we come to a close here, what are the key takeaways?
Remember to dig beneath the surface of what people are saying.
Look for those underlying interests and needs.
Strive for clear, factual communication, free from judgment.
And remember, address the issue, not the person.
Get creative. Brainstorm multiple options that could satisfy everyone involved.
And in any negotiation, ground your discussions in fair, objective standards.
Perhaps most importantly, cultivate genuine empathy.
Really listen to and acknowledge the feelings and needs of others.
Even when you strongly disagree with their viewpoints or actions.
And be prepared to address those difficult or manipulative tactics head on.
Name them and insist on a fair negotiating process.
So how can you start putting these ideas into practice today?
Well, in your next conversation where you sense tension or disagreement, try actively listening for the other person's underlying needs.
And when you need to express a concern, try framing it using the NVC structure.
Observe the situation, identify your feeling, connect it to your unmet need, and make a clear, specific request.
Another great exercise is to take a current situation in your life that involves some conflict or negotiation and brainstorm potential solutions that address everyone's interests.
You might be surprised by the creative possibilities that emerge when you shift your focus from just getting what you want to finding solutions that work for everyone.
So, learner, here's a final thought to ponder. Think back to a time when a negotiation or conversation left you feeling truly heard and satisfied.
Were the principles we discussed at play, even if you weren't consciously aware of them at the time?
Now think about a time when communication broke down or a negotiation went poorly. How might you have approached it differently using these frameworks?
Remember, developing your ability to communicate effectively and negotiate with both principle and empathy is an ongoing journey.
These books provide fantastic frameworks. But the real growth comes from putting these ideas into action and reflecting on your experiences.
What new possibilities might open up for you as you integrate these approaches into your interactions?
That's a question worth exploring.
And that's a wrap. Learner, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
See you next time.